What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the latest episode of Rooted, where we always say if you want to get the fruit, you have to get to the root.
Yes, sir.
And, man, we are really, really excited about today's episode. He's no stranger to Generation Church, no stranger to the Made to Win podcast. Actually, probably one of our most downloaded podcasts ever was the episode that you and I did way back when. And so I know this will be a highly listened to episode as well. But I want to welcome to the show Pastor David Rotteveel. So excited to have you, bro.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm really excited.
Dude, so serious question starting off. If you had a wrestling name, what would it be?
That's a good one. One time when I was a kid, a guy nicknamed me Rottweiler.
Oh.
And it doesn't really match my personality, but it sounds cool.
I like that.
You know
That's
what I mean?
pretty cool.
Yeah,
David Rottweiler.
Certainly when I was a
think
kid.
it checks out, man.
When I was a kid, I certainly wasn't anything like a Rottweiler, so I'm not really. I mean, obviously, it came from it sounded like my name, but I mean, I was flattered then. I'm flattered now, so I think Rottweiler.
If you could do like David Rowdy Rottweiler.
That's even farther away, maybe, from my personality.
That's why I love it.
Some people might describe me as rowdy. I don't know.
Dude,
Maybe.
no, you're 100% rowdy. You get a couple of
No,
Diet
no,
Cokes.
you
You get a
get-
couple of
yes.
Diet Cokes in you,
About three
Bro.
Diet Cokes in, boy.
bro. I've seen you. Yeah, this
I
man.
received that
I just
humbly.
want people to know, listening, like this man does not drink coffee. He doesn't, other than Diet Coke. Like I've never seen him drink an energy. I think if he drank an energy drink, his head would explode.
I am curious on what David Rotteveel would be on like 300 milligrams of caffeine.
Oh, my
Right
gosh.
out the.
Ironically, one of the only times in my life I've had an energy drink, it was a Bang energy drink
Yes.
from you guys while I was
We would
preaching.
never.
And I forget who it was. They were like, "Oh man, you gotta try one." It was cotton candy, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was delicious. And I took that thing down, and I was like sweating, and,
Itching.
dude,
He was on a
like,
street corner with a
yes.
sign after that.
bro, doing push-ups in the auditorium. I was like, and I preached like I think I blacked out. I'm
Yeah,
not
oh,
even
yeah.
sure I was even in the room.
You had a squat PR that night too.
Wow. So I'm not sure that those are the best thing.
So here's what I kid you not. We have an in-house or resident intern coming to stay with us for a year, and we're trying to get a gift basket for him or whatever. And like he's from Arkansas, and so one of his requests for his favorite drink is like a Bang, And it's funny because I kid you not. Like the local stores here, there was a time when our band pretty much determines the consumption and marketing of all energy drinks in our city. They no longer sell Bangs because our band moved on from Bangs, and now they drink Ghost. It's a different energy drink. And so now you're seeing our local stores like load up on Ghosts because
Wow. All right.
we have
All right.
totally changed our local market and what they sell.
By
That is
cases.
the calling.
Cases
You know,
at a
that is
time.
our calling.
Is
as
it though,
Christians,
David?
right?
I'm kind of
That's our
concerned.
calling is to affect the culture. It's to
Yeah.
impact the culture and community around us. You guys
Yeah.
are doing that by energy drink consumption, and
Yeah.
I'm excited for you guys. man.
I don't know that that's what I really want to be
Things are
known
going
for,
really
but
well.
okay. So, and all seriousness, I don't know how you transition with that, but today's episode is going to be really, really good. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of stuff from this episode, especially if you. I just want to take a moment and address if you're listening and you're just the average church attender, or maybe you're just curious because of the title of the episode as we talk about confronting cultural Christianity. And it really is. I wanted to give a disclaimer. This is not an attack on the American church or the local church. I mean, obviously, we are pastors. We are passionate about the local church. We pastor in America. But I do think it is a critique and just a observation. Right. This is what we have experienced. This is some of our observations of what is happening, and I don't know about, we'll get into your story a little bit, but even my own shaping, I think one of the things that I always tell people, one of the greatest signs of maturity is being able to look back on your life and disagree with your former self or disagree with the older version of yourself. There's a lot of things that were shaped into me in my young walk with Christ, because I became a Christian at 18, that I look back now and I'm like, man, that was not right. And so I think that's some of the conversations we'll jump into. And so I want to give you an opportunity to just share like a little bit of your church background, how you ended up where you're at today as lead pastor and founding pastor of 12 Church.
Sure, man. I grew up in a home with a mom and dad who loved me and my sister very much. Great parents, but were not believers for a majority of my childhood. Jesus saved me when I was a senior in high school. I was 17, a little bit out of nowhere, but just I've always said that I I feel as though when he saved me, he simultaneously called me into ministry.
Yep, I
I didn't
felt
really
that.
understand that at the time, but looking back on it, reflecting, I just became obsessed with preaching the gospel. So it took some years to work out what being called to ministry even looked like, and I had very little understanding of what it meant to be a pastor or how churches operated, because I didn't grow up in church. So it took a couple years, but then just very quickly began a career, I guess, for a lack of a better term, in ministry. I became a lead pastor too young. I was 21 years old, and of a church that's in a community about an hour away from where I sit right now, in Dade City, Florida. And I led what we call in the church world like a revitalization effort for almost 4 years. I pastored that church, and God did some incredible things and really just covered me in his grace. Because again, I would not advise any 21-year-old to be a lead pastor of anything. So, but that church is still growing and just doing incredible things in that community. And I'm really good friends with the lead pastor there. And so, always thankful for that. And then did a couple of years in youth ministry with Pastor Gary Baldus at New Walk Church in Zephyr Hills, Florida, which is again about an hour from where I sit right now in Florida, and learned from him. He planted New Walk Church in 2006, so I learned from him and just shadowed him and really tried to do as best as I could to sort of see the behind the scenes of how churches operate and learn what I didn't know, because I had this sort of uh, just this restlessness about this particular area of Florida called Pasco County. And it's where I'm from. I'm born and raised. And so it was all the while, it was God really calling me towards planting a church in Pasco County. And so I'm very thankful for the time I spent with Pastor Gary. He taught me so much. I find myself, sounding like him all the time, saying what, he says a lot. And 4 years ago, my wife and I moved back home to Pasco County to plant 12 Church. And we are just so excited to be a part of what God is doing here. Ever since we got saved, I was 17 when Jesus saved my wife was 16, and ever since we got saved, we really have had a burden for this particular area and the gospel of Jesus. And so to see the gospel of Jesus reach so many in this area is quite literally a dream come true, a dream we had for many, many years. And God has just been so faithful. And we at 12 Church, we have a little bit of a complicated history. We've had to move, I don't remember how many times, 7 times through COVID and things like that. But
You launched
again,
like a week before the world fell apart, right?
we did March 1st of 2020 and had a really big grand opening, and incredible things happened. The whole world shut down. So I often joke that I was a televangelist before I was an actual pastor, because,
Yeah.
I just preached, 20 or 25 weeks online like we all did. Right. So, but yeah, I could tell you story after story of just incredible things that have led to this moment. But sitting here where we are right now in a facility where we are growing and expanding and praying about what our next strategic moves are as a church in order to facilitate the people that God continues to send and save. It's so humbling. And, my wife and I often look at each other and just in disbelief that this is real, so, and I'm thankful for friendships and partnerships like you guys at GC and so many churches who have poured into us and encouraged us and supported us and prayed for us, and on and on and on I could go. And so I love GC. And, the other day when you asked me to be on the podcast, I mean, it's a no brainer. I jump at the opportunity. So excited.
Tell the audience a little bit about the name 12 Church, 'cause I thought that was a really cool like meaning
Sure.
behind the name.
Well, part of it came out of sarcasm because I'm pretty sure the closest my wife ever got to divorcing me. My wife's name is Stephanie. We've been married for 13 years by God's grace, but I am sure she was really close to divorcing me when I was trying to come up with church names. I was bothering her like every 15 minutes. What do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Or does this sound cool or does this sound dumb? What about that? And she's like, David, for real, like you have to stop.
Yeah.
And we were meeting together and we were, a pastor advised me to write the vision and write the mission and the values, and the name would sort of come to me. So I began writing it out and I just began to see a theme. I began to see that I had sketched out 12 values that are would align our church's mission, and then we drew a map of our mission field of Pasco County, and I had 12 communities highlighted that we'd hope that we'd have influence in and reach with the gospel. And so I just kind of sarcastically was like, hey, would you just call it 12? And then everybody in the room was like, you know what, we should. That's a really good idea. And so I was kind of being sarcastic, but the name 12 Church now reminds me as often as I say it that our church exists to reach West Pasco
Yeah.
before we reach the world. Like we want to reach the world, but this is where we're called. This is our community. This is our mission field. And so everything we do, we try to do with the understanding that we live in a particular community, in a particular context, with particular needs, and we want to reach those right here in our community. And so it just sort of drives our mission and reminds us why we do this and why we started this. And, we can't help but say the name 12 Church without thinking of West Pasco, which is the community we're in. So, yeah. And you know what? People ask us all the time, why 12? And I always tell them it's so you'll never forget it. That's what I tell them when they ask me, like in Publix or in a grocery store, because you're not going to forget it. That's what that's what I tell them,
That's so good, man. So good. Well, as we transition and start having this conversation, one of the things that I thought would kick off in a really good way was a quote that I'd heard recently. Because I do think when we start talking about this idea of cultural Christianity, I think it kind of is this blanket statement for what we are seeing across our country. I think a lot of people, they call America like this Christian nation. There is some sort of, I guess, label that we give ourselves that, Christian, the term Christian has become more of a multiple choice box to fill in out of all the other religions, right? Like if I'm filling out an application for something and it says, what religion are you? It's like, well, Christian sounds good, out of all the other options. But man, it was one of the leading atheists. His name escapes me right here in the moment, but I just recently saw an interview they did with him, and this blew my mind. He's like one of the leading atheists, writes all the books, debates all the time, and one of the leading atheists of our generation. And this is exactly what he said. He said, I consider myself a cultural Christian. He said, even though I don't believe in God or believe in Christianity, I really enjoy a lot of the traditional parts of Christianity. He said, I would be really sad if some of the cathedrals went away, if some of the art went away, if at Christmas time, if we lost some of the Christmas songs and, some of the hymns. He said, they're just so beautiful and full of art. And he said, and those things, they make you feel warm. They make you feel good. He said, that part of Christianity, I really embrace. And my jaw hit the floor because I'm like, bro, you are explaining half of the people who call themselves Christians in America. And so I want you to kind of talk to us about what are your observations about seeing this problem with cultural Christianity, and how do you think we got here?
Wow. Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of when you quoted him. I'm like, man, you're not alone. That's a lot of people.
Richard Dawkins. Sorry, the name just came to me.
I actually thought it might have been, but I didn't want to be wrong. So, but yes, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that Christianity originated in America, as though the two are synonymous.
Right.
And so we hear things like, America is a Christian country, so that leads a lot of people to false conclusions. One might be, again, that Christianity originated in America. Like the founding fathers got together and they were like, let's start a country with our own religion called Christianity.
Yeah.
And that's just simply demonstrates a lack of understanding of history and
Sure.
and just all the events that happen. But another conclusion that people might come to is that to be American means to be Christian. And because again, like as though those two things are synonymous, and the reality is that is not true. And that's a hard truth to preach, and it's a hard truth to remind people of. But unfortunately, I think there's a lot of Americans that simply by virtue of their citizenship of America, that they were born in a Christian country, if you will, that makes them a Christian, or that they could somehow inherit Christianity from their Christian parents or grandparents. I've never conducted my own research or interview. I can't imagine what the results would be if I were to go around and ask people who just casually call themselves Christians, like, what are you saying? What do you mean? So you say you're a Christian. Can you help me understand, what that means? And I would imagine I would hear things like, oh, I was born a Christian. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that without asking people.
Yep.
They'll just tell me, yeah, I was born a Christian, and what that demonstrates, again, I'm not trying to attack those people, but it just demonstrates a lack of understanding of what being a Christian even is. So, and I've gotten to the place in my life where, man, it seems like anytime somebody asks me a question, I have to ask them, what do you mean? Like, like people have different definitions of different words and different terms. And so if they're like, hey, are you a Christian? I've got to be like, well, yes, but what exactly are you asking?
Sure.
Can we make sure that we have the same understanding of what it means to be a Christian? And I think probably one of the biggest, flaws, I guess you could say, of Americans is that we don't realize, one, how big the world is.
Yeah.
And just how far back history goes. And I think we have the tendency to think in like a bubble of where we are right now. And so we contextualize everything through the lens of being an American. So we read the Bible that way. We talk about God that way, as though Jesus was an American, like he was from Chicago or something. And we just like talk about Jesus like he was a typical American guy. So every sermon he preached, every passage we read, every story we see in the Bible, we read through a lens of being American. And I think that leads to a lot of unhealthy places and sometimes even dangerous places, right? So yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that's so good, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember this time last year we were doing some interviews for student leadership, and one of the questions we always asked was like, "Hey, when did you get saved? When did you ask Jesus into your heart?" And the response was, "Well, when I was born." And it was like, "Okay, we're all born into sin." You weren't born into Christianity. And I just think too, just like how you just said, just because you were born in America, just because your dad was a pastor, your grandpa was a deacon, a preacher, whatever it might be, hey, this is your faith. This is your walk with Jesus. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that.
Well, and that's another answer people give too, is when you start asking about their faith, it's like, oh, well, I was raised Catholic or I was raised Methodist. Like they never address like some sort of relationship with Christ, relationship with following Jesus. They address some sort of religious background. And I think that's part of the issue too. And so even in our local context, it's amazing how many people that don't even attend church, but because of their some sort of religious background, they hold to a set of beliefs or traditions. Like we had people that would like just say all kinds of things about our church, but like when you get to talking to them, they don't even attend church themselves, but they have some sort of idea, or they grasp some sort of concept of what Christianity should be. And for the majority of it, especially like, I don't know if you experience this in Florida, because Florida is like, it's the South, but it's not. So like Florida's kind of weird,
Yeah.
But like you don't talk like us, we don't talk like you. We say life and stuff like that,
Yeah.
But
All my life, man.
all my life,
y'all.
That's right. That's right.
But that's right, yeah. But I think Southern Christianity, even especially like Bible Belt ministry, is. I've got a buddy who pastors in Baltimore. And I'm like, bro, sometimes I'm like jealous, because at least there, it's like, like people like know that like, man, I'm not that. I'm not a Christian. I don't do the church thing. Here, it's like, it's everybody's saved. And so you almost spend
Yeah.
more time trying to convince people that what their version of the gospel is wrong than actually, uploading the
Yeah,
truth.
when you really tease it out and you like, you look at, specific examples in culture. I mean, there are people who perceive Christianity as a white man's religion.
Yes.
Again, going back to like Jesus was white. Some people perceive Christianity as synonymous with a particular political party.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm in this political party,
Yep.
I am a Christian by default. Some people just see Christianity as the attempt to be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
So when they, by the way, that's an inaccurate definition of what it means to be a Christian. I think we're going to dive into that a little bit more, but
Mm-hmm.
they see being a Christian as just trying to be a good person. So when they say they're a Christian, what they're saying is, I try to be a good person. That's what they're saying. But they say Christian, and on and on and on I could go. And yeah, it's not only in America, you're right. It can be specific to like the region that you're
Yes.
in, how
Yes.
Christianity is perceived and received in that particular region. And so, if you are pastor a local church, our jobs are different or can be different depending on where you live.
Yes.
And, we get plenty of that because a lot of people in Florida are not natives. They've moved down from, northern states or, so we kind of see a little bit of all of it. And I don't think that the problem you described there in Tennessee is unique to you, or your friend. I don't think it's unique in Baltimore. Unfortunately, that's an idea that is just sort of swept the nation, and it's an unfortunate reality. But to be truthful with you, it kind of fires me up because I see only an opportunity to get the real gospel out there.
100%.
And I just, I've seen what God can do, and I've seen how God can change minds and change hearts and change lives. And, I just look back at what I used to think a Christian was versus, what God has done in my life up until this point, and how his grace has changed my entire perspective. And so, it's a great opportunity we have for sure.
So let's flesh some of those out, because you said something a minute ago that I think ties into the first, I guess, kind of the focal American gospel that we wanted to address, because Comer talks about this in detail in some of his teachings, but I thought this was so good. And the first one is that whole, they call it the evangelical or the simple gospel. And this is what's fascinating. This is stuff that I've learned over the last 5 to 6 years is a lot of how even we grew up, or let's say, when I came to Jesus at 18, the church that I attended or the gospel that I was familiar with was this gospel. I think in the South, this is primarily one of the gospels you see a lot. And it's, like when you start talking about using terms or terminologies, and here's the thing, some of these things aren't even like bad or anti-biblical, but they're also not like written in stone somewhere in the Bible. Like terms like the sinner's prayer. It's like, have you said the sinner's prayer? Well, if you're the average person, you go Google or look up where in the Bible is the sinner's prayer. You can't find that, right? And again, not saying that those things are bad in themselves, but the simple gospel, what people don't understand is like, this has only been around really since the World War II era, the industrialization. And it really became this idea as everything in America became quick, easy, almost like the industrialization of America, the gospel became industrialized. And it became like this idea of like, how can we get a bunch of people into heaven? How can we basically simplify this to a prayer? And I'm not even saying that those things, the people didn't experience genuine salvation out of it. But I think the problems it has created is the goal just became, the baseline is say this prayer. And if that is the minimal thing that you do, nothing else really matters. Your life doesn't matter. The discipleship portion doesn't matter. I think a lot of churches that grew up in that era, they were great at getting people in the baptism waters, but then left them in the seats, soaking wet with no discipleship or no, like how does this live out? The thing that I love to say is like, man, I don't think the goal was ever to get us into heaven, but it was to get heaven into us. And so what plays out is what you just said, is that gospel leads more to a sin management personality or attitude. It's, well, as long as, because I think even in student ministry, this is what you heard a lot. And I think we talked about this in our other podcast we did. Even youth ministry became, well, is it okay if I do this? Like, where's the line? Like, people want to know, like, where's the bare minimum? How can I manage my sin in a way to, like, yeah, I did some of this stuff, but, it didn't really cross the big line. And so therefore, I'm okay. And I think what plays out is there's no seeking to know God and become like him, as Colossians 3 tells us. It really is just, I just need to manage my sin, do more good than bad, which is not the gospel, right? That's an entire new, that's Islam, or that's another religion. It's like, if that's the case, why the cross, right? So
That's right.
Talk to me about your experience with that and kind of your thoughts.
It's not just youth ministry, man. Every year our church does something. We change things up a little bit in that we do a series. I'm currently preaching it right now. And we've called it Asking for a Friend, where instead of like preparing a message that I would preach like I typically do, we put a phone number on our screens, and anyone can text any question on any subject to that number. And then I do my best by God's grace to answer it just live and on the spot. And question after question after question is a variation of what you just described. It's not just youth ministry; it's adults. I preach to adults. I'm talking about a community of adults who are texting questions.
Well, your adults were my students in student ministry. I'm old, so
that's fair. But no, but I just mean, like
I know what you're saying.
It's something that I commonly see in adults as well, and maybe that did originate in student ministry. That could be, but yeah, it's morality. Mm-hmm. It's what are the things I have to do, and what are the things I'm not supposed to do, mm-hmm. and what are the things I'm supposed to do if I accidentally do one of the things that I'm not supposed to do, and then what's like the really big ones where if I do, I should just give up Christianity altogether because I'm out anyway. And then what are the things I can do to like get me like in, to the front row of heaven, and it's just morality, and it's Christless, and it accomplishes nothing. And the way I've always described it is that it leads to only one of two places, either pride or depression, because you make a list of rules that aren't in the Bible. It's your own scale, it's your own metric. And if you accomplish what you think you should accomplish, then you're just a prideful jerk. You're just a self-righteous, lonely person probably, and people don't really ever want to be around you, and you probably find yourself very alone, and you're really miserable. And really at the heart of it, it's pride. Or you in a moment of honesty would admit that you don't even live up to your own standard, and therefore you're depressed. So it's either pride, I did it, or depression, I can't do it. And the gospel's nowhere present.
Right.
The cross is nowhere present. The grace of God, the nature and character of God, the gospel is just not there. So, and it could be that, we have spent a lot of time and resources trying to disciple people who are not disciples.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to attack anybody.
No,
Again, I don't mean that to hurt anybody's feelings or anything, but you can't disciple a goat into a sheep. You can't mature as a Christian until you are born again as a Christian.
Come on now.
And so I think a lot of times we just try to help people grow, but they're not rooted, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we do that, though, what we're really doing is just coaching morality. It's behavior modification.
Yeah.
And so then, people end up where they mess up, or they end up in a place where, they've just sort of drifted. We hear this a lot as pastors. Oh, I've sort of wandered. I've sort of drifted. And so the farther they wander or the farther they drift, if they knew the gospel, they would know that the nature and character of God sustains them even in their wandering. But because they aren't rooted in the gospel, they just figure they've might as well give up, because I've already done too much to, I can't go back to him now, and I'm never going to be able to make up for it. So I might as well just, maybe claim Christianity if I'm asked, but I might as well give up on this whole thing. And it's heartbreaking.
Well, and
it really is.
It's like you said, it's like trying to throw water on a seed that's in your hand instead of in the ground, right? Like you can do all that stuff, but man, if it's not rooted in the truth and rooted in the gospel, there's you're never going to grow the fruit of Christ. You're never going to grow
Absolutely.
the fruit of the Spirit. And I think
Absolutely.
that mindset too, because here's what we talk about all the time is like most people, because they're not rooted in the gospel and because they don't read the Bible, the number one issue I see with a lot of this is people do not know the character of God. And when I was just sharing this with my kids this week. We're in 1 Timothy in our morning devotions with my kids. And it's so powerful because Paul's really trying to explain to Timothy the overall premise is that, man, what you believe about God shapes how you live your life. And if God to you, if the character of God is you better fly right or I'm going to zap you right where you stand, then already you are starting out in the wrong direction, right? You're starting from the wrong starting point. And so you're drifting so far left of the gospel that's why I don't know if you experience this, like when you talk to people or invite people to church or try to share the gospel, people say things like, well, I've got to get some things right in my life before I go to church. You don't want me walking in that building, man, the roof will cave in. And it's like, where do these thoughts originate from? Like, why do people think I have to get cleaned up before I come to God? Unless they think the character of God is this, he's non-personal, right? And that's what's fascinating is it's actually the same theology that Paul and them preached against. It was the theology of Gnosticism, or this theology of like dualism of everything else is evil, like the evil and good, but instead of understanding common grace, instead of understanding like that, man, he loves everybody in the world so much that he wants to give you an opportunity to be a part of his family. And that what he's trying to build is a family. He's not trying to build a moral building or a moral temple. He's trying to build a family. And if I can't see him as the father, the shepherd, and the husband to the bride, like all three of those are super relational. All three. I mean, that's what the Bible describes him as: a father, a shepherd, and a husband to the bride of the church. And so I don't know if you've experienced some of that too. Got thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you said it, if you start in the wrong place, you're going to end up in the wrong place. It's as simple as that. And the starting place of the gospel is not, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, or God wants you to go to heaven with him. And that's a lot of times what we hear presented as the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
But the starting place of the gospel is the nature and character of God, that he's good and holy and the creator and Lord of all things. And when you start there, then I've always sort of summarized, if you will, the gospel into like 5, I don't know, truths that are sort of the foundation of the gospel, if you will, and the pieces that you have to understand in order to get the totality of the gospel. And to leave any one of them out is to get an incomplete picture, if you will. And I'm not saying that this is a perfect thing at all, but I would say it would be the nature and character of God, the sinfulness of man, the person and work of Jesus Christ, the necessity of faith and repentance for salvation, and the urgency of eternity.
Yeah.
And when you start in a place that misrepresents God, or describes God in a way that the Bible doesn't, then you're gonna, if you don't see God properly, you won't see yourself properly.
Mm-hmm.
You won't see any need for Jesus. Faith and repentance doesn't make any sense. And and as far as eternity goes, it just doesn't matter, because it's all because you started in the wrong place. And of course, just like anything, if you start in the wrong place, you're going to end up in the wrong place.
Yeah,
And I can't tell you how many times I've heard the gospel, which is now a word that has just kind of entered into the junk drawer of Christianity, and
Yep.
kind of one of those things that, it doesn't. I mean, again, you have to clarify what you're even talking about, because I mean, I would be terrified to go into any church and just say, "Can you do me a favor and just tell me the gospel in like 30 seconds?" And I don't even know what I would hear. In fact, one time I was at a conference that for Christians, where the guy I mean, almost word for word said, I can't define the gospel for you. You have to define that for yourself in your respective communities. And I wanted to like throw something at him,
Wow.
like it just was, and that it just kind of goes back to like, we just live in this, we live in this culture, we live in this time in the world where like everything is relative, everything is subjective, it's your truth, my truth. There is no truth, and so that obviously affects us as pastors. It affects us as Christians, and yeah, you have to start with the nature and character of God. You have to understand who God is, and unfortunately, there is a lot of misunderstanding about the nature and character of God, and that just leads to we're seeing the result live. Like we're seeing it in our churches, in our communities, in our schools, and yeah, it's heartbreaking
I
for
like what
sure.
you said, David and Pastor Brandon, about you starting in the wrong place. You make these false claims or wrong claims about, like how you mentioned, Pastor Brandon, about if I show up, the roof will cave in or whatever. But I also believe that we ask the wrong questions. One thing that I love to, I like to ask our students questions. When they ask me questions, they love it. One thing that I like asking them is, does what you are doing, regardless, is it a sin, Pastor Tyler, or whatever? Like, does it draw you closer to God? Like, can you answer that? And if so, okay, cool. But if not, then like I just think far too often we ask the wrong questions. Not is this a sin, but is this drawing you closer to the Lord and strengthening your relationship and your walk with Him and the people around you?